the rope of forgiveness. Romans 5:8 here in just a second. There's a turn of events that took place on Holy Week. And it started with Jesus' arrest in the garden. He then was tossed back and forth between Pilate and then to Herod and then back to Pilate again. And Pilate gave in to this persistent crowd, and instead of releasing Jesus, he allowed Barabbas, a convicted criminal, to go free in the place of Jesus. And then the unthinkable was set into motion. First, the flogging, a process that took place prior to every Roman execution. Only women and Roman political and military personnel were exempt from this process. The Jewish law limited the number of lashes to 39. But what we don't know for sure is whether the soldiers actually stuck to the law or if they took matters into their own hands when it came to Jesus. The flogging, though it was unthinkable, an unthinkable form of torture, it was just the beginning. Jesus was still faced with the cross. Another form of torture that was designed to produce a slow death with a maximum amount of pain and suffering. It was the most disgraceful and cruel form of execution. From the flogging site to the site of the crucifixion was about a third of a mile. And Jesus was required to carry this crossbeam that weighed about 75 pounds. The upright portion of the cross, known as the stipe, was normally planted in the ground ahead of time. And the crossbeam was then attached to the upright once they got there. The spikes that were used were about 7 inches long, that were driven through the palms of his hand. Then they would use rope to tie around the wrist and the crossbeam for additional support. No matter how you explain the cross, it was horrendous and unimaginable. The average suffering period was anywhere from like 3 to maybe 10 hours. Outside of the excruciating pain that was caused from the flogging and the crucifixion, the ability to breathe, especially the person's ability to exhale, was greatly hindered. The weight of the body pulled down in such a manner that breathing became almost impossible. And so they would push themselves up in order to get a breath and to exhale by pushing up with their legs and flexing their elbows. What a horrible thought. And if that wasn't enough, the soldiers would come along and break their legs so they could no longer even push themselves up to get a breath. During the time of suffering, it was also customary for one of the Roman soldiers to pierce the body with a sword after they have suffered for quite some time. Tradition tells us that this piercing was most likely a spear wound to the heart through the right side of the chest. And if they weren't already dead, that was the fatal blow. Holy Week came to a screeching halt on Friday, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, as Jesus hung on the cross and he breathed his last. It was the fulfillment of his mission. It brings new light, doesn't it, to the thought that Jesus suffered and he died for you and for me. Romans 5:8 says it all. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. Praise God, huh? The greatest expression, it's hard to get our minds around this, but the greatest expression of God's love was the death of his Son. There's a price for forgiveness. The ransom had been set by God. There was no other option. He had to die for the forgiveness of sin. He died to reconcile us, sinners, back to a holy God, so we could have a relationship with God. This sacrifice is understood as what we call the Godward action towards man. This was God turning towards man. We are the recipients of an act of love that took place between a father and son. An innocent, unattractive man of sorrows carried the weight of it all to the cross. The weight of the cross that Jesus drug through the streets is symbolic of the weight of all of our sin. The rope that was used along with the nails to hold Jesus on the cross, it represents our hope of forgiveness. Let the rope be a great reminder that Jesus died for the forgiveness of your sin.